In Claire's direction. Claire Spencer's the Director for Middle East and North Africa Programme at Chatham House. Probably one of the people who knows the region best, certainly north of the Mediterranean. It seems to me that some of the problems that have been highlighted are precisely the problems that led to the Arab Spring 2 years ago. But of course, not all governments are able to address them, and the old regime is continuing not to address them. But at the same time, the Arab Spring has sort of injected this new dynamic of people wanting to take charge. How is this panning out in the region? What political actors are we seeing? What trends can we identify, if any? Or what should we be following? What is important in your view?
Well, thank you very much. I just wanted to start by making a comment on with respect to Mentor, the largely British character of this panel. It's very unusual in these things. Maybe the organisers thought that the British keep calm under stress and that we manage crises very well. But those who know me know I'm not very British in that respect, although I can deal with a crisis. And I think the use of the language of crisis makes me think of another British saying, be careful what you wish for. Because it seems to me the real crisis in the region is the one Mensur mentioned in Syria, because there is no easy way of either conceptualizing it or indeed addressing what are in fact a number of multiple problems, most of all the fact that the conflict in Syria isn't just about Syria and its internal implosion, it's about regional dynamics and the fact that external actors all have an interest in the way things develop there and are in fact, even though we have endless discussions about the fact no one is intervening, of course the reality is lots of people are intervening already on one side or the other, and that is part of the problem, that it has not been internationally sanctioned. As Mensur said, there hasn't been, or they don't exist, the kind of regional security or other frameworks actually to manage this crisis. So I would say that is the crisis. If we move further west, and I spend most of my time looking at North Africa, again, if we look at Egypt, the reflection I've had over the last couple of days is, fortunately, Egypt has not turned out like Syria. Whatever we've seen going on there, and it has been serious, there's been loss of life in protest last year, there have been human rights abuses, we all know the stories. Egypt, this enormous country of, I don't think people even know, Angus, how many people live in Egypt. 85 million is the figure we bandy around, but you might have a better idea. 85 million people has not imploded completely. There have been moments of crisis, but overall the place has held together. And I, as an infrequent visitor to Cairo, I'm always amazed that those guys who hold those boards with loaves of bread very early in the morning trotting through the old city actually get out of bed and do that every day. There is something about the dynamics in Egypt that make it carry on working. That is not to underplay the fact that there are indeed a number of potential crises in the works, and I think Angus has flagged the majority of them. Inflation, food prices, as Rosa has said, were all present at the beginning. They were part of the catalyst. They weren't the only catalyst, as many have said. It wasn't, the uprisings in Tunisia were not essentially economic, but they were certainly, as many observers since have said, been related to the crisis in Europe. This is where the fact that certainly the western end of the Middle East, North Africa, is highly dependent on Europe, means that since 2008, the fallout from the financial and economic crisis, when you have 60% or more of your external trade with the European Union, necessarily it affected the economy of Tunisia and other states, less so the oil exporting states like Algeria, obviously, but they have been affected differentially by this crisis. So the first point I want to make is that while we talk about the crisis in Europe being separate from what's going on in North Africa and the Middle East, I'm currently working on a project which suggests that not only are they related, and they're related on the European side as well as the North African side, but we have to look more closely at what we've been talking about in the Barcelona model for a long time, co-development models, but in a much smaller scale. It seems to me on the periphery, particularly southern Europe, if I may say southern Spain, not even necessarily this part of Spain, has to rethink, it seems to me, completely its relationship with Morocco. Morocco is 14 kilometers away from Andalusia, from southern Spain. If you look further over towards the nexus of Italy, Tunisia, Libya, I know already Italian policy is focusing largely, and I think quite rightly too, on Tunisia and Libya as future explorations. So while we still need the EU frameworks, I think the bilateral nature of European cooperation with their nearest neighbours is going to become important. It already in the past has been important. The biggest investors in Morocco have traditionally and continue to be France and Spain. I think 60% of foreign direct investment come from those two states alone, the large part from France. So I think we shouldn't delude ourselves that suddenly the whole of the European Union is going to get more interested in this region. But taking up Angus's point, I absolutely agree. In fact, what I was planning to say was this idea that if we're talking about democratization and stabilization of situations in the region, you cannot extrapolate the politics from the economics. Until people are empowered, and this goes back to your question, Rosa, the empowerment of people seems to me resides in economics. This is the history of Europe, that democracy only really took off when people had property rights, when they had their own income, when they no longer aspired, as many Middle Easterners do, to work in the public sector for and benefited by the state, but they actually set up private enterprises, which in turn became the foundations of what we refer to as civil society. If you don't have your own income, you don't have another important part, the rule of law, or some kind of legal system to protect your property and monetary rights, you will not be able to hold governments to account. You cannot hold a government to account who is your employer. This is something I think we need to flag more often to those who really want to return to a system where you just rearrange who's running things, there's a different party in power, and all you're doing is replacing one set of patronage and clientelist networks with another. So this does mean opening up the space to more small and medium enterprises. I think the problem in Egypt is medium-sized enterprises, is it not? There are many very small companies and there are a number of very large companies. There's not much in the middle. So part of the model from outside has to be to look at the technical requirements of how do you build a small company into something medium and larger, which will actually employ people. I think another side of this is obviously given the corruption of previous regimes. I'm thinking here particularly of Tunisia and Mubarak's regime in Egypt. The private sector has got itself a bad name. Private sector, private business means corruption for many people. Again, I think Europe has a lot to offer in terms of the kind of models of business regulation. These things are very small detailed, but how to manage and regulate this new private sector space is something that I think there is definitely skills that can be transferred from Europe. And this needs to be packaged, and I'll finish on this because we need to discuss this. This needs to be packaged in the kind of model which actually answers requirements arising within the region rather than being put together as the famous European Union or Commission toolbox to actually offer. You can say what is available, but I think we need to go beyond doing things in an intergovernmental fashion and actually identify interested entrepreneurs on the European side and indeed on the Turkish side who are prepared to engage as mentors, as those with skills in a particular very specific sector. I'm thinking particularly of the IT sector, where there's a lot of young entrepreneurs in Britain, I know in London, who are extremely interested in getting engaged because they've watched the Arab Spring on television with their counterparts in Egypt or in Tunisia. How can we manage that? Are there the channels for that to happen? That interest is there. Even some of them, I have to say, including my own brother, who's curious, would do it for free. I mean, he's made his money, so now he's prepared to come along and do it pro bono to find out, not to come and tell people how to run a business, but actually share some of his experience with those across the region in ways that they can then enjoy the kind of networks he has internationally, particularly into the US and elsewhere. Because let's be under no illusion, the future of this region certainly, and I'm again talking about North Africa in particular, lies in the immediate term through Europe. But there's a reason why North Africans are learning English, and it's not to flatter us British on the panel. It is because it's the global language, and they're interested in engaging with India, with Brazil, going further afield into Asia, and English is the vehicle through which they'll do that. So Europe, in many ways, is the springboard for the insertion of this region into global economies. And I think we need to think along these terms in terms of, going back to the original question, how we address the crisis. In the short term, things are going to be messy, they're noisy, but we have to go beyond the headlines about extremism, violence, dare I say it, even Salafists taking over bits of Tunisia. This is not what this is about. This is about the relationship between economics and politics. And I think Europe has a lot to offer in mining these areas, but we have to go into the detail and go beyond generalizations about the region.
Thank you very much.